Last week, I lost the defamation lawsuit against me brought by Khurram Awan, the former youth president of the Canadian Islamic Congress. We've talked about that lawsuit before. He's the former youth president of the Islamic Congress. He was one of the students who were involved in a series of Human Rights Commission complaints against Mark Steyn in Maclean's magazine. Steyn had written about the threat of radical Islam in Maclean's magazine, and Awan and the Islamic Congress thought a proper response was to ask a government agency to censor them. In Canada, seriously. I wrote about that on my personal blog, and I attended the hearing at the BC Human Rights Tribunal back in 2008 because of my interest in free speech and censorship and my opposition to radical Islam. Awan sued me for what I wrote about him and his involvement in the case, and last week a Toronto judge ordered me to pay him a whopping $80,000 plus his legal costs. The total bill will likely be well over $100,000. The court ruling is long, 38 pages, and I'm still reviewing the technical aspects of it with my lawyers. But there's something terrifying buried in this ruling that I already know I simply must appeal, all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, if necessary. In paragraph 166 of the decision, the judge ruled that one of the things I did wrong was calling Awan an anti-Semite. She said that was defamatory, and that's one of the reasons I lost and have to pay him so much money. But Awan was, at one time, the youth president of the Canadian Islamic Congress, an anti-Semitic organization. The Canadian Islamic Congress has publicly called for the legalization of anti-Semitic terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. At the time Awan was its youth president, the Canadian Islamic Congress was led by a notorious anti-Semite, Mohammed El-Masri. El-Masri famously went on national TV to state that any adult in Israel is a legitimate target for terrorism. Here, he said it on Michael Coren's old show.
Anyone over the age of 18 in Israel is a valid target.
Anybody above 18 is a part of the Israeli popular army.
Everyone in Israel and anyone and everyone in Israel, irrespective of gender, over the age of 18 is a valid target.
Yes.
Huh. So Awan was the youth leader of this group. He made a presentation to Parliament on its behalf. He helped draft the complaints against Mark Steyn. He testified in El-Masri's complaints against Maclean's, and never during any of this time did Awan renounce either El-Masri or the Canadian Islamic Congress's anti-Semitic policies or statements. He was the youth leader of an anti-Semitic group. So I called him an anti-Semite. But here's what the judge ruled in paragraph 166 of her decision. Based on the trial evidence, the defendant has also not proved that the plaintiff is or was an anti-Semite. The defendant in cross-examination did not say that he was. The defendant relied on the plaintiff's connections to Dr. El-Masri and in turn the CIC. However, the words complained of were specific to the plaintiff and were not stated as matters of opinion. So the judge says that when I called Awan an anti-Semite, it was a statement of fact, not opinion, and I hadn't proved that it was factually true. Stop and think what this means. Someone is involved with an anti-Semitic organization for years, working directly for its chief anti-Semite, is involved in policy and politics, for a group that calls for the legalization of Muslim terrorist groups, Hamas and Hezbollah, does not reject his boss's statement that any adult in Israel can be killed legitimately. But I can't call him an anti-Semite on that basis. And this isn't a letter to the editor, to me, disagreeing with me. This isn't advice or debate or disagreement. This is a court ruling. This is the law. This is a branch of the government, the courts, saying that it was unlawful of me to state that because I wasn't able to prove that it was a true fact. I cannot state that Awan is or was an anti-Semite based on his involvement with an anti-Semitic organization run by a vicious anti-Semite. Because I stated something that the court says I shouldn't have stated, I am liable to pay him money, and the court has ordered that I delete those comments from my blog of 6 years ago. There are other parts of the court ruling that will likely affect no one else other than me. That's my loss. But what about this ruling, this precedent on when you can or can't call someone an anti-Semite? That's what a court case is. That's why courts are public. They publish their rulings to set a precedent, to warn others in the community what to expect from the law and how to govern themselves. Any pro-Israel or anti-Hamas activist, anyone concerned about racism in Canada or anti-Semitism, anyone concerned about radical Islam, watch out. If you call someone an anti-Semite, you could be taken to court, to our Canadian courts, under our secular laws, be dragged through a 5-year legal ordeal, have to pay your own lawyer enormous sums, and then have to pay even more to the person who you think is an anti-Semite. Now, the judge says the problem was that I called Awan an anti-Semite as a matter of fact, instead of as a matter of opinion. Awan's evidence at trial was that he is not an anti-Semite, and the judge accepted that. My appeal won't be about that. It'll be about whether I was stating my opinion or a fact 6 years ago when I said he was an anti-Semite. Now, that may sound like a dry legal point, but it's important. Do you know the difference? If you were in a conversation or a debate or on the street or at the protest or calling to a talk radio show or writing a letter to the editor, would you know exactly how to phrase it to avoid getting sued? Let's say you're a Jewish student in your first year at university, and a bunch of well-financed professional pro-Hamas activists bring an anti-Semitic propaganda exercise to your campus called Israel Apartheid Week. They call Jews fascists, compare Jews to Nazis. They call Jews Islamophobes, of course. They use vicious and racist language to dehumanize Jews and Israel. Maybe they call for the legalization of Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist groups like the Canadian Islamic Congress does. And you're an 18-year-old Jewish kid or a Christian kid, and you see this onslaught of anti-Semitic bigotry, and let's say you write an opinion letter to your college paper and say, they are anti-Semitic. Well, guess what? You just got sued. You think an 18-year-old Jewish kid or a 90-year-old Holocaust survivor will be able to phrase and parse things in just such a hair-splitting way to be technically permissible? To know the exact legalistic wording to make their statement a matter of opinion instead of a matter of fact? Or do you think it'll be now open season on those who object to racism, that we'll see countless lawsuits against Jewish activists, people concerned about anti-Semitism, because they didn't phrase things in a fastidious, legalistic way? Do you think those Israel activists will instead simply stay silent rather than risk being sued in order to pay tens of thousands of dollars to their tormentors? By the way, do you think this is a two-way street? Do you think that if a Jewish or a Christian activist were to sue anyone or everyone who called him an Islamophobe, do you think he'd get $80,000 in court? Let me show you what it's like out there. Remember when we had our pro-Israel rally in Calgary in July as a response to the pro-Hamas riots there 2 weeks earlier? Remember these Muslim students who showed up to chant Heil Hitler at us?
Heil Hitler! Heil Hitler!
And that's what it's like out there in Canada in 2014. The police just stood there doing nothing. In all of Canadian history, our hate speech laws have never once been used to prosecute Muslim extremists. Never, not once. Media were there too, standing right there, but they didn't report on the chanting of Heil Hitler. They're afraid to even criticize radical Islam. Of course they are. But what if some Jewish kids saw those Muslims chanting Heil Hitler and called them anti-Semites, but didn't phrase it in just the right way? My critics call me names every day, Islamophobe, racist, whatever. I know it's not true. I brush it off because I know who I really am. I take their name calling as a sign of their desperation. But if I sued everyone who called me names, do you think the courts would censor people for calling me that? Of course not. Not that I would want to do that. I mean, imagine the courts of this country rehashing every political argument 5, 10 years later. But that's the real problem here. $80,000 plus paying his legal costs, that's an enormous hit. That's a lot of my life savings. But that's my business. What about the country's business, freedom of speech? What about the right of people to speak truth to power, to call out anti-Semitism when they see it? What a precedent this court decision gives to anti-Semites. Now they just have to watch the precise wording of the Jews they're hunting. If they catch a Jew phrasing their criticism just a little bit wrong in the future, they could sue them, shut them up, and get paid. I'm still reviewing the court decision. I'm not going to litigate the appeal in the media. The matter is still before the courts. But I had to tell you the news about paragraph 166 in the decision, the rule about me calling Awan an anti-Semite. I had to tell you about what I think its impact will be on you, how I think it could be a weapon used by Muslim extremists in the future to shut up anyone who calls them out. I'd be talking about this ruling even if it weren't me who was the defendant. I simply have to appeal. You can read the entire court decision for yourself at my website, standwithezra.ca. You can read the judge's full findings. Who knows? Maybe you agree with her and think I'm in the wrong. There are certainly a lot of people celebrating this court case, many because they despise me, but many others because they want to stop criticism of radical Islam. What do you think? There are parts of the trial that I won. For example, the judge agreed it was a fair comment for me to call Awan's dealings with Maclean's magazine a shakedown. There were still other parts where the judge admonishes me for not being more rigorous in my blogging. I'm not above contrition for when I fail. I'm not above listening to constructive criticism for self-improvement. The judge was forceful in this regard, and I accept the admonition to improve my practices. As you know, here at the Sun News Network, we do check our facts. We verify things. We ask the other side of the story for their point of view. We run our work past lawyers before going to broadcast. The Sun is a more rigorous journalistic workplace than my homemade blog 6 years ago was. I'm not so stubborn that I won't accept feedback to do better and aim higher. There's no point in being obstinate about everything. I am open to correction, especially on the process of journalism. I'll take those parts of the judge's decision to heart. I already have. But where I keep my stubbornness is on points of principle, like freedom of speech. Go to standwithezra.ca and read the case for yourself. Read it, the good and the bad. Make sure you read paragraph 166. If you think, as I do, that we need to appeal, please help me out. I estimate the cost of the appeal will be $30,000. If you can help chip in to cover the legal fees, I'd be very grateful. And you can do that right there on the website too, standwithezra.ca. Look, I fight for freedom every day. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. I always get back up again and try to learn a few things, try to be better. It's always a good idea to be as accurate as possible, as fair as possible, especially when criticizing someone. And the judge had plenty to say about that. Good points. But that's a different subject. What scares me is this. Is it really illegal in 2004 to call activists in an anti-Semitic organization anti-Semitic?